Welcome, everyone, to episode number 2. You have found, once again, the Heroes and Icons podcast. I am your host, Greg Randolph. Please find us on Instagram at Heroes and Icons Podcast. You can also find this and future episodes wherever you enjoy getting your podcast. If you would, please review, subscribe, like, and share, and that helps us deliver premium content to you as well. So thank you for doing that. Let me take just a minute here and introduce my guest. Our guest today enjoyed a baseball broadcast career spanning 45 years for the Cincinnati Reds and Houston Astros. His highlight reel includes calls of the Houston Astros' 2005 National League pennant-winning season, Craig Biggio's 3,000th career hit in 2007, Jeff Bagwell's 400th career home run in 2003, and the 2,000th career hits for Bagwell, Miguel Tejada, and Carlos Lee. In 2004, he was inducted into the Texas Baseball Hall of Fame, and in 2012, at the Houston Baseball Dinner, he was named by the Houston chapter of baseball writers as the recipient of the Fred C. Hartman Award for long and meritorious service to the industry. He has also written or co-authored several baseball and Houston Astros historical books, is on several local advisory boards of schools and charities in the Houston, Texas area with his wife Diane, and he is still involved with the Astros organization. Without any further ado, my guest today is the one and only Bill Brown. It's been a few years, sir. It's really great to see you. How are you? How's the family doing, and what's keeping you busy these days?
Well, thanks for coming out, and I'm glad you're doing this podcast. The family's doing great, thank you, and we're very grateful to God for all the many blessings we have. We're in good health. We have 2 grandchildren in college, and the third one is a junior in high school. So
wow,
we're
okay.
Extremely blessed and trying to keep up with them from afar because they're in Minnesota.
Makes travel a little difficult.
Yes.
Okay. Any future baseball players?
Well, no, we don't have any future baseball players, but we have 3 great kids. So that's the most important thing.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So let me just dive right in and talk about. So you grew up in Missouri. Can you talk about that time, and what was your first introduction to baseball?
For some reason, and I played baseball when I was probably started when I was 7 or 8, like a lot of kids do, and just loved it. Couldn't get enough of it. We would play in the front yard or backyard, wiffle ball at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of wiffle ball, and then I played organized ball, Little League, and Connie Mack and Babe Ruth and the organized leagues. Never played on my high school team. I really wasn't that good, but I couldn't get enough baseball.
Okay.
And would listen to baseball games, would read the newspaper, and just read the statistics. And back in those days, Greg, every Sunday the paper had all the batting averages of all the players. That was the only time you get to see batting averages, on Sunday in the paper. So we'd really await the arrival of the Sunday paper so we could see what Julian Javier was hitting. But it wasn't available all the time like it is now.
Of course. So was there something what initially captivated you about baseball? What made you gravitate towards baseball so much?
It was a popular sport. Most of us guys played it in some form, whether it was wiffle ball or whatever. A lot of us listened to it on the radio. And I really think that was what captivated it the most for me, and then led to me wanting to do that.
Okay.
Because of listening. And usually it was the St. Louis Cardinals, Harry Carey and Jack Buck.
Right. So
they were my nightly entertainment, and I would do what other kids did and go to bed with the transistor under my pillow, and Mom would open the door at 9:30, and you sleeping in there, son? Yeah, I'm asleep. And turn down the radio a little bit, and let's go back to the 7th inning, that kind of thing.
So you had a job at a bowling alley that was Broadway lanes.
Yeah.
And you saved money from that job, and you bought a cassette recorder, and then on the Saturday game of the week, you and a friend would turn down the announcers on the TV, and then you would call the game yourself.
Yes.
So can you tell me about that, please?
Well, I didn't go to many major league games. We were in Sedalia, Missouri. We were 80 miles from Kansas City.
Okay.
And we had the Kansas City A's back then,
right,
before they moved to Oakland. And
right.
We went to a few games there. St. Louis was 200 miles away, so only went to just a few Cardinal games. Therefore, I not the only way to practice doing play-by-play was to turn down the sound on TV. And that was a difficult way to do it, but a good learning tool nonetheless. And then occasionally I would take my recorder out to Jenny Jane's Stadium, which was the local park, and do some play-by-play of whatever games happened to be played, summer league stuff there. And it didn't really matter, who the players were. You could make up names, but it was just the idea of describing the action.
And that really appealed to you after listening to Buck and Carey?
Oh, definitely. For me, that was number one. So when I was 14 years old, Greg, this is what I wanted to do. Okay.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to understand there. And so you had done this, and then you start calling games in high school, and actually the day after your high school prom, your dad sends you off with his briefcase and a little bit of cash and says, "Hey, good luck, go get them," type of thing. Could you talk about your dad for a second, what he meant to you in that way?
My dad was a great guy. He was a hardworking small town attorney. So he at one point was the prosecuting attorney, but also was a defense attorney. And he did divorces, he did, accident lawsuits and things of that nature, occasionally a criminal case. We'd get calls at 2 and 3 in the morning from guys in jail wanting him to come down and bail them out. Wow. And the phone would ring, and, back in the old days before cell phones, woke up everybody in the house, of course, and I would usually answer it, and it would be somebody who had been arrested, usually for DUI or something along those lines, and wanted him to come down immediately and bail him out. Okay. So he'd get up at 6 in the morning and have his legal pad and have his cup of coffee when the rest of us got up, and he would have been working on lawsuit information, examining abstracts, I believe it was most of the time. But I never had any desire to follow in his footsteps. I did see him in the courtroom a few times, and he was a really captivating speaker. So I think that is what I took away from it more than anything else. Using speech as an occupation and as a way to express and as a way to get to a point of convincing people to do something. That was really what I took away from that. But he was a great dad. He was very supportive. We didn't play catch a whole lot because he was busy, but they went to all my games, and very, very supportive, great parents.
And then you took that speech part and you combined that with your love of baseball, and that kind of segued into the broadcasting part.
Yes, and I took speech and debate in high school, and that wasn't where I wanted to go. I didn't want to be an attorney. In fact, Dad asked me if I wanted to go to law school after I got my degree from the University of Missouri in journalism, and I said, "No, Dad, I've had it with schooling. I want to go to work. I want to be a broadcaster." So that was there was never any intent to be a lawyer, or even for that matter to be a motivational speaker or anything like that. It was just always broadcasting.
Okay. And then you're calling so at UM you're calling some high school games at that point, and you're kind of building up to other things there. And so you graduate from UM. And then that's in 1969, and then in 1970, we're, I guess, still in the middle of Vietnam, and you're drafted.
Yes. And
then the Army assigns you as a specialist to the Armed Forces Vietnam Network.
Yes.
But you'd already been there for a little bit. So what were your duties then before you were assigned to that, and then how did that assignment come about?
Good question. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because my first job after college, Diane and I got married right after college, 1969.
San Antonio.
Yeah, San Antonio. So I was at San Antonio WOAI-TV, and I was a news reporter. Okay. And so I'd go out and cover shootings and stabbings in City Hall, and I hated it. I hated the job. I wanted to do sports. They would not let me do sports. They'd let me go out and shoot film of sports and write stories for the sportscast, but they wouldn't let me go on the air and present the sportscast because my boss, the news director, said, "You look too young." And I said, "Well, I thought we were trying to attract a young audience on TV." He said, "Well, you're just not believable. It's a credibility issue." So I would prepare the entire weekend sportscast, and the news anchor would have to read it, and he didn't want to do that either. So he was pushing for me to go on the air also, but they never would relent on that. So actually, it was a break for me that I got drafted, went into the Army, and then wound up going to Vietnam because that was the first time I got to be a sportscaster.
And that was, and the Army gave you, the Army gave you your first big career break.
That's right.
Essentially.
So to begin with, to answer your question, you land in country in Vietnam, and you land at Long Binh, and that's where I wound up working because the way it operates, as a draftee, and I had some time at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Spent about 8 months there, and I was a broadcast specialist there. So I was in my field. A lot of times that wasn't the case in the Army. You were put in some other area not comfortable to you at all, not in your field of endeavor. But in this case, it worked for me. And so when I landed in Vietnam, you got the 14-hour flight. You're talking to some other guy next to you who's in the same shoes. You don't know what you're going to be doing. You land there, and somebody had flagged me from the Long Binh Public Information Office because what they do is look at resumes and say, oh, this guy's trained to be a broadcast specialist. We need that right now. So total luck. Otherwise, I could have been out in the jungle in a platoon, carrying a rifle.
Yeah.
And you didn't know until you got there what your assignment was going to be. So very, very fortunate. I was working in an air-conditioned building. I had blanket travel orders. So what I would do is go out in the field and I'd interview soldiers. And so, if you're Sergeant Greg Randolph and you're from Omaha, Nebraska, I'm doing an interview with you and I'm sending the tape back to your hometown radio station. And they're playing it on the air to let people know what Greg Randolph is doing in Vietnam.
Wow.
And so it was a good job. I enjoyed that job, but
Sure.
then there was a chance to transfer to Saigon to AFBN and do sports, and that was the big break there when I transferred there.
Very good. So what was the technology like back then, and how did that present challenges at that time? I mean, that's just what those mediums were, but how did that affect what you were able to do at that time?
Good question. I had my own office at Long Binh, and I had big tape machines. We had the reel-to-reel tape machines back in those days, and I had small cassette recorders that I would take with me out in the field, and then we'd transfer them over to the reel-to-reel tape machines and do editing. And so if I wanted to do a voiceover and then put your voice in and then introduce something else about what you were doing in Vietnam and then put more of your voice in, there would be some editing for that. I had a little booth where I could record my own voice and assemble the tapes and then put it all into one package and send it out to the radio station. Of course, then it was mail. You're sending a reel-to-reel small tape out in the mail to Omaha, Nebraska. So that's how the technology is different. Now, when I got to AFVN, we did radio and TV live. We had several radio sportscasts a day. Sometimes we had 15-minute sportscasts. These went to the troops out in the field. So the guys out at the fire base in Quin Yon could turn on a transistor and hear our broadcast. Or if they were actually working in an office in Quin Yon, they could watch on TV, the TV sportscast. So the only winter I was there was 71, and Major League Baseball cooperates with the USO to send ball players over to Vietnam. So Bobby Bonds and Doc Ellis come over on a tour, and I interview them on TV. And that was a big thrill, of course, at that time. I really hadn't had availability to major league players. This was my first big shot at that. So yeah, this was a tremendous break for me. People say Vietnam. Yes, it was. Because then when I got back from Vietnam, I wound up getting a job in Cincinnati.
Right.
And it was, I think maybe the tape that I sent to Cincinnati's TV station, WLWT-TV, where I work, might have been influential in getting that job. Who knows?
Well, and then certainly you were when you got there, you to the station in Cincinnati. It's 1972, and you work with a gentleman who was the radio voice of the Cincinnati Bengals, a gentleman named Phil Samp. Can you talk about how he influenced you and about his stopwatch technique?
Yeah, he was great. Phil was the old school type of broadcaster who just assumed the first day that I was going to be able to handle this. We talked about the basics of it. He didn't try to tell me how to do the job or anything else. He just said, well, here's what you need to do. These are the times you need to do your radio and TV sportscasts. These are the deadlines for you to get your scripts in. This is how you put your film together and your tape and all these things, and go get them. And he did the Bengals, so he was gone for 6 weeks, I think, in a training camp in Wilmington, Ohio. He just lived in the dorm up there with the Bengals. So I had to do his sportscasts for him during that time, which was great training for me. I got a lot of airtime on radio and TV. But and I did the general manager's show with Bob Housen, the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds, once a week. So these were all great bits of exposure for me to life in a big league city, which I'd never had before.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time at Riverfront watching games. And so I took my little recorder down, and if I was doing the 6 and 11 o'clock TV sportscast, I'd go down for maybe an hour and a half in between those two sportscasts, and I'd take my little recorder and I'd go in an empty booth and get the notes for the game and take a stab at doing 2 or 3 innings of play-by-play, because that's really what I wanted to do someday.
Right.
But the sportscasting job there was fantastic. That was a huge break to be there, and of course the Reds were great at that point, and the Bengals were good, so it was a good time to be in Cincinnati.
How did you know that play-by-play was on the horizon for you at that time?
I really didn't. This job is so unpredictable, and so many things happen that looking back, you shake your head and wonder, well, how was I so fortunate? You know, I mean, God was looking after me. There was no doubt about that, because there were many people. You know, Phil Samp had a great voice, and he was very natural on the air, and I would watch him do that show and think, well, he's never going to leave here, and I'm never going to get his job. But that really wasn't the job I wanted anyway. And I'd listen to the Reds, and the year I got there, Al Michaels was their play-by-play guy on radio. And I would think, well, I'm never going to get his job. He is just absolutely the best I've heard. So it would go like that. And then you'd look back now on it and say, well, you know, there were so many people, even who weren't doing those jobs, who were better than I was. I don't know how I'm so lucky. And the answer is that God looked after me. I just had a lot of blessings.
Always.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So you got to work in the early 70s years, this show that you have that's a pregame show with before Reds broadcast was called Red Scene.
Yeah.
And you got to work with Sparky Anderson. Can you talk about your relationship with him, your friendship with him, and then how he had a very keen internal sense of timing to get you the clip that you needed?
Oh yeah, Sparky was the best. He reminded a lot of the national writers who would write articles about him in books about the Reds of Casey Stengel, because he loved the media. He knew how to manipulate, if you will, the media to get his message out. For instance, he loved being asked tough questions. So he had his daily manager show on the pregame radio program, and he wanted Al Michaels or Marty Brenneman to ask him, why did you pinch hit for so-and-so in the 7th inning? And John McNamara, who succeeded him, did not even do a pregame radio show because he hated to be asked questions like that on his strategy. But it gave Sparky a chance to explain himself to the fans. So I think it was very astute on his part to want to have that opportunity. Sure. But he was great with anybody. If you were a newspaper writer from Evansville, Illinois, and you came to 4 games a year, and you went to the PR director, Jim Ferguson, said, I'd like to sit down with Sparky, he'd sit down with him and then he'd give him, 20 minutes or whatever, and then the New York Times would have somebody coming in the next day, and he'd give that guy 20 minutes. So he was very fair and equitable with his time, no matter your stature in the game. Young broadcaster who didn't know the game, very patient with you, very patient with me. We did, it was about 12 Red Scenes a year, and we did a TV show that was a half an hour leading into the TV game.
Okay.
So if we're in Philadelphia, Sparky would be on with me. If the game started at 7:30 Cincinnati time, like at 7:25 till about 7:28. And you're looking at me like, really, a manager would do a live show that close to game time? I don't know if anybody else had this. I didn't see it, but he agreed to do a live show about 3 minutes right before the ball game like that. And it's not that the manager is, has to do a lot of prep or he's worried or praying or anything like that. It's kind of downtime. It's kind of just waiting for the game to start. Everything's been done, but still, most managers wouldn't do that close to game time. And he was just tremendous. The thing I always say about Sparky is, he was such a good human being. If the Reds were on a road trip and they got back from the West Coast, we'll say, and the next day they were off, he would go to Children's Hospital and visit some kids. And he never wanted any publicity on this at all. Just didn't want anything written about it. He didn't want any photos. He just wanted that to be his time with the kids. And I think that speaks to the kind of person he was. So, you can't ignore this when you're young and impressionable. And, you see, somebody who's a real big figure in the game, has a lot of stature in the game, is willing to do the things that we all hope that everybody does, but we know they don't.
Right. That certainly speaks volumes about the kind of man that he was.
Yeah.
He was also a good baseball man and a little bit of a character, maybe. Am I saying that right?
Oh, you are saying it right. So if you were, let's say he talked to 4 different reporters before a game, and they all asked him the same question, he would give all of them a little bit different answers, so they'd all have their own particular story that no one else had.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So 1975 ends. You're coming off the Reds win the World Series over the Red Sox.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that World Series like? And then how did that change the organization? And then what you did and going into 76, which is your first year as the full-time play-by-play announcer for the Reds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the timing was incredible looking back on it now. For me, it was just incredibly lucky. But in 1970, the Reds had made it to the World Series and lost to Baltimore.
Right.
72, my first year there, they lost in Game 7 to Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
Great World Series. And in 73, they made it to the playoffs, lost to the Mets. So now 75 comes, and this team that's been known as the Big Red Machine since 1970 is starting to have, these conversations with each other along the way of, hey, we haven't won a World Series yet. We're the Big Red Machine. We're not really living up to that. It's time that we won a World Series. So there was pressure that they were applying to themselves to finish the deal. And 75 brought a great team. They won 108 games. They would beat teams, 10-2. A lot of these games were not even close. They were just so superior to other teams. Their lineup was incredible. Their defensive play is underrated. They were a great defensive team. The pitching was good, but not great. It didn't have to be great because of the hitting they had.
Right.
And yet their bullpen was very good. So when they had to protect a 1-run lead, they did that very well. And so it was a big deal for them to finally finish that off and win that World Series in 75. Although, the Carlton Fisk home run in Game 6 that
Mm-hmm.
beat them in the 12th inning at Fenway Park was interesting because that pushed it to a 7th game. And then Joe Morgan's single in the 7th inning beat the Red Sox 4-3 in the 7th game. because of the way television portrayed the Fisk home run, which was great. It's a great portrayal. This was the memorable moment of that World Series for many people. And so, as Johnny Bench said on a documentary about him, he said, well, the Red Sox have always said they won that series 3-4. That's about the way it was portrayed. But nobody ever remembers Joe Morgan's single that won the World Series. So, that's fine with people in Cincinnati. They brought home the trophy. There was a big parade on Fountain Square, and it was a huge deal. And then so to get that job doing their play-by-play in '76 was just, beyond. I had filled in on a few games, but right. I'd also been passed over for the job a few years earlier. And typically right. The job was not, at that point, we were only doing about 40 games a year on television. People might not remember that if they're old enough to remember anything from that time. But we just, the Reds did not want more games televised than that. They just thought it cut into their attendance, and they wouldn't agree to it. And we only did 3 home games a year, and we couldn't promote any of those home games beforehand. So they were just really worried that they were a regional franchise. Cincinnati was one of the smallest markets. They just thought people would stay home and watch on TV, and it would cost them at the gate, and they wouldn't allow it. And then of course, cable came along in the early '80s, and that changed everything. But it was a big deal still to get that job, and I knew that they had passed me over before for it, so I worked as hard as I could to hold on to it.
Very good. Very good. So let me jump back just a bit to 1972. I apologize, I missed this. So in 1972, towards the end of the season, the station makes a last minute decision to air the possible division clinching game.
Yes.
And it's actually in Houston at the Astrodome.
Yeah.
So what were your impressions of the Astrodome at that time, and then how much of a challenge of calling that ninth inning by yourself was that?
I was absolutely petrified. But Diane and I had been to the Astrodome once. The year we were in San Antonio, '69, we came over to a game. The station had tickets, and we drove over, as I recall, that afternoon and went back that night after the game. So a lot of driving, but definitely, the Astrodome was a place you had to see if you were able to in any fashion and from anywhere in the state of Texas. And it was worth it. So I had been there before, but the suddenness of that game was, beyond any preparation that you could have had, because they decided, we were here in Houston. The Reds at that point traveled quite a bit commercially, and so they would travel the day of a game. Yes, the players hated it, but we'd leave at 9 o'clock in the morning to make sure we got there for a night game. And players hated getting up and driving to the airport and all that sort of thing. And believe me, some of the rest of us were not big fans either. But that's the way they did it to save money. Compared to the money spent on a charter flight, that is a substantial savings when you multiply it by any number of flights throughout the year. So that's what they did. And we got in, and we were at the hotel, and the PR director said, "You want to take a tour of the Astrodome?" I said, "Yeah." Because we weren't supposed to be televising the game. And we got back, and it was, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we got word, well, we're adding the game to the schedule tonight. And so we went from not even expecting to be on the air and doing my first major league. So Tom Hedrick was the play-by-play guy, and he said, "Have you done baseball before?" I said, "No." He said, "Okay." And he was very calm about it. And his nickname was the Parrot, because he really overtalked for TV. He was a Kansas City Chiefs play-by-play guy on the radio. Very good at that. And he worked with Waite Hoyt on TV, the Hall of Fame Yankee pitcher. And Waite was in the hospital, so that's the reason I was filling in. And I was petrified. And so knowing that Tom would carry the mail, I just didn't talk much at all. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And then after the 8th inning, the producer said, "Well, Tom, you're going to have to go down to the field now for interviews. If we win the game and clinch, then we want you interviewing the players. So he took off, and I looked around, and there wasn't anybody else in the booth, and I was doing play-by-play of the ninth inning with a 4-3 lead, and Clay Carroll, the closer, walked the bases loaded. So that I couldn't tell you, Greg, one word of what I said that night. I have no idea what I said that night, but it was a big thrill.
Would it have made a little more sense to maybe send you down to the field of the clubhouse and get the reaction and let Tom finish the play-by-play?
In one sense, yes, but in another sense, did I know the players? Well, I had done interviews with a lot of them before, but I was brand new to the telecast, and I think they figured he had been a part of everything all year long, and he deserved this. And I'll tell you what, I don't think they put much thought into putting me on there doing play-by-play, but it worked out. At least I didn't get fired, so I guess it worked out.
Very good, very good. Well, let me get back over to 75 and 76 and those Big Red Machine years, and so what was we talked about the team a little bit with them putting the pressure on themselves to win a championship. Hey, we're the Big Red Machine. We've got this. Look at our infield, for crying out loud. In addition to everyone else. So, did they just feel unstoppable? And is that really just the main thing that a team like that has when they're at that level and they're in their mindset and they're winning?
Yeah, they knew they were going to win. They weren't quite sure how. They knew they were going to hit. They were going to score runs, even against the best pitching around. I will say that when they came to the Astrodome to play the Astros, when it got to that point that they had, in 80, we'll say, when they came here, and they had to face, Ryan and Necro and Richard in a 3-game series. Those hitters we're talking about, what a difficult assignment that was. Because a lot of them found it difficult to see the ball in the Astrodome anyway. It was the only dome stadium at that time. It was darker. They couldn't pick up the ball as well. And then just the caliber of the pitching, and then the difficulty of hitting the ball out, which was, that was a team that just crushed the ball. Home runs, doubles, triples. And doubles and triples were pretty common in the Astrodome. Home runs were not. So they knew it was going to be a difficult time. And that was more of a 3-2 win if they were going to win it than a 10-4 win. You know what I mean? And they really had to scratch for their runs and pitch well. So I think they knew they would win. They just had that confidence with, they had all these Hall of Famers. Johnny Bench is quite possibly the best catcher who ever lived. You can't prove that, but a lot of people believe it. Pete Rose, if not for the gambling, would certainly be a Hall of Famer, the all-time hit king. And then Tony Perez is a Hall of Famer. He drove in the tough runs. He was the best clutch hitter on the team. Joe Morgan, back-to-back MVP, 75-76. And he's the guy who really accelerated the offense with his combination of speed and hitting and drawing walks.
Good kind.
You're talking about Gold Glove guys, Morgan, Concepcion, Cesar Geronimo in center field, Bench up the middle. Just a fantastic all-around team.
Griffey, Tolan, all those guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Very good. So the Big Red Machine, the title's in, the Yankees come on, they start their championship run. So in 1978, the Reds management decides that they're going to start making some really large wholesale changes. So they let Sparky Anderson go. Pete Rose moves on to Philadelphia. Tony Perez moves on to the Montreal Expos, and so you lose all that talent and that leadership. Tom Seaver comes over in a trade from the Mets, and certainly not a bad consolation prize, but the dynamics of the organization and the team have changed quite a bit at that time. So how did that affect your relationship with the players and then the fans and the broadcast?
I thought it was good. They had to work really hard to win that 79 division title from the Astros. That went down to the end of September. And with Seaver there, and we had some young pitchers, Frank Pastore, Doug Capella. It was more of a low-scoring type win that they had to get then. Ray Knight stepped up, and he was one of the real leaders of the team, offensively and defensively. But they were missing that firepower that you talked about. those guys who left. And Bench had a lot of games under his belt, and he had some injuries, as most catchers do after all those games, and he wound up later on moving to play third base, and to get his knees out from behind the plate. But they were a very gritty team. Seaver was a big part of it. He was a lot of fun to be around. Ray Knight was always a guy I enjoyed, and I thought the players were very, very good. They just, back in those days, you got to know players a little bit more than you do now. Now there are, agents are very prominent, and ball clubs kind of give players a pass on the media. They'll only make them available at certain times before a game or after a game. And back then, you could walk in the clubhouse and talk to just about anybody. It was pretty freewheeling for the media. So we got to know each other pretty well. We had a guy named Mike Lum, who was an outfielder. He was a backup outfielder, and he did magic tricks. And we had dinner with him and his wife one time, and he had this really sharp metal object that he poked all the way through a balloon, and it didn't pop. So, yeah, he'd pull some magic tricks like that. A very entertaining guy, but that was back in the days when you got to know people a little bit better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you stayed with the Reds with Cincinnati until 1982,
Mm-hmm.
and in 1987 you take the full-time role with the Astros.
Mm-hmm.
But between that time, you moved to Pittsburgh,
Mm-hmm.
and you take a job with FNN Score,
Right.
and they send you to Los Angeles.
Right.
You're there for a little bit, and then you take a job with Paychecks out there, and then in towards the end of 1986, you've reconnected with Dick Wagner,
Mm-hmm.
whom you knew from the Reds.
Right.
You interview for the Astros job when you're out there in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about how your time in Cincinnati prepared you, as well as those years off? How did that time prepare you for your next job with the Astros?
Well, I got fired in Cincinnati after 82. We lost 101 games. I didn't do a very good job, I must confess. But the year before, 81, the strike year, the Reds actually had the best record in baseball. But when you parse the two partial seasons together, and they didn't win either half, so they weren't in the playoffs, so the total wins didn't really matter. They lost the first half of the season by, I think, a half game, and game and a half the second half. So it was a pretty big shock to go from the best record in baseball to 101 losses. And obviously the TV ratings were down, and I will confess I didn't do a very good job that year either of handling all the losses. So I got fired, and I had signed a 3-year contract right before that, but it wasn't the type of contract you're thinking about. It didn't guarantee payment for 3 years. It stated in the contract, and you're going to think I'm a knucklehead for signing this, that every 13 weeks they could cancel it. So that wasn't much of it was a 3-year commitment on my end, but a 13-week commitment on their end. Well, I just had confidence that they would abide by the 3-year deal, and they didn't. For some reason, they changed their mind, and I wasn't as good, and they wanted somebody else. So, that's our business. That is what you expect to have to deal with someday, unless you're really, really good or really, really fortunate. So I was scrambling around, got the job in Pittsburgh. That company went out of business after 1 year.
Okay.
Went to L.A. I went back to Cincinnati for a year to work in cable TV this time with the Sports Time cable network. And that company went out of business after 1 year. Then we went to LA and been there for a couple of years, and that company didn't look very good to me either. And I kind of knew what it was like to be handed a final paycheck, and I could see the signs that led up to that. So I thought, well, I'm going to need to get something else. And fortunately, Dick Wagner came out and was on a show with me when the Astros were in town, and then he called me a few months later and said, would you be interested in our job? And oh man, I was thrilled to get back into baseball. At that point, I hadn't been in baseball for the last 5 years,
right,
and didn't think I would ever get back in. And I was preparing to do the paychecks thing, and let's get an 8-to-5 job, and that's going to be the rest of my working career probably. Reality sets in, and you realize how fortunate you were to have those years on the air. So they narrowed it down to 3 of us. They flew all 3 of us in for interviews. They had us all put our voice and our play-by-play on a videotape of a game from the previous year and do 3 innings. And so the final 3 in the contest were all doing the same 3 innings of the same game, and they could compare. Is that fair? Well, that's the way they chose to do it. I'm not going to knock the process. I wouldn't do it that way. I just think, after the miles of videotape that had been sent you by each guy to look at, you had more of an idea of what his whole body of work was than 3 innings of game. But it did put everybody under pressure, and so I was lucky enough to get the job. And it was such a blessing to me, but I didn't get hired until February. And the job started in about 2 weeks after I got hired in spring training doing radio. So that was a crash course.
Right.
But, it was easy because the players were so good. Craig Reynolds, Terry Poole, Mike Scott, Kevin Bass, all those guys were fantastic. And they really, really made it easy for me.
I can certainly see that.
Yeah.
I can certainly see that. So what was the excitement like in the later years of the Astrodome? And you've seen Biggio, Bagwell, Caminiti through their careers, and they're veterans now, and they're leading the charge in those late '90s division championships.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was fun to watch Biggio come up as a catcher and be an all-star, and we would always wonder about, well, what about his speed? How's catching going to affect his speed and stealing bases? And he's a small guy, and Art Howe, you've talked to on your earlier podcast, was worried about him getting knocked into the nickel seats by Dave Parker on a home plate collision or something like that, and that's a legitimate worry. Back in the days when there were home plate collisions. So I wondered about that too, but I certainly didn't see him moving to second base because he had played a little outfield, and I thought, well, they'll probably stick him in left field, and that way his offense will be good, and his legs will not be subjected to the challenges of all the crouching and, the mental wear and tear, and, they'll get more games from Craig Biggio than they would as a catcher. So that was fun to watch. And then Bagwell came along, and I looked at him that spring playing some third base, and Caminiti playing some third base, and I thought, well, he's nowhere close to Caminiti defensively. I don't know what they're going to do here. Right. And little did I know they would think about moving him to first base, but that was a stroke of genius. And to his credit, he was able to make that transition very quickly.
Sure.
So I think those are the 2 big memories for those guys that because I'd seen Pete Rose play 5 different positions and was an all-star at all 5 in Cincinnati, and you're not going to see that again. But just the idea that this is what the team needs you to do was so impressive to me. And some players would have said, no, I'm a third baseman or I'm a catcher, and that's what I am. And that's happened many times in baseball. But these 2 guys said, okay, I'll give it a shot, and wound up in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. And with Bagwell, he by his own admission, he said, well, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I can figure out that, do you want to be a first baseman in the majors or a third baseman in the minors?
Yeah, he told me in one interview, well, I didn't go to Harvard, I went to Hartford, but I could still figure out this is a better shot for me, because he said, my dad said, well, okay, after looking at Caminiti here, AAA is not so bad, Jeff.
Absolutely. We had that certainly turned out very well. So let me talk about moving from. We talked about the Astrodome being a tough place to hit anyway. Tough pitchers. It's darker in there, mm-hmm. And so the team finishes playing in the Astrodome in 1999. 2000, the Astros moved to the park at Union Station. Mm-hmm. So how did that change with the new dimensions of the stadium and sunlight, and just have it, and it's a different atmosphere? How did that change your approach to broadcasting then?
I loved the move because I thought it was great for the city to have this downtown ballpark. I thought it was great to have a retractable roof, although I am disappointed they don't open the roof more. And then it was a totally different style of baseball. We knew there would be more offense, but of course until you've been in a park for a while, it's hard to really say how it's going to play out. Well, they set a record for runs scored and for home runs in the National League, and so I didn't think it would be that drastic. But part of it was the pitchers were just shell-shocked, especially Jose Lima, with all the home runs he gave up. And the hitters, a lot of them had a banner, Richard Hidalgo, Baggy. They just had banner years cranking home runs, and yet they had a losing record. So the pitching just wasn't good enough to hold up for them. And at that point, I wondered, oh boy, what have we created here? Because doing the games was absolutely the opposite of doing the Astrodome games. I've always loved 3-2 ball games. I love the stolen base being a factor, and the sacrifice bunt being a factor, and the ground ball to the right side with a runner at second and nobody out being a factor, and great defensive plays win games and things of that nature. And that doesn't happen the first year at Enron Field. That does not happen. You're playing 10-8 ball games, and it's a slugfest. And so obviously the games are a lot longer, the broadcasts are a lot longer. Yes, there's the excitement of a lot more run scoring, but I don't look at it that way as a broadcaster. I get very excited about a 3-2 ball game, because every pitch is so much more important than it is in a 10-8 ball game. Now, sure, if you have the offensive capabilities that all teams had at Enron Field in 2000, there are going to be big comebacks, there are going to be exciting games, but there are also going to be a lot of blowout games. And for me, I think the best opportunity for a fan to enjoy a game is to have a close competitive game. And so with a 2-1, 3-2, 4-2 type ball game, there is that excitement on every pitch that it could change.
And then you have some different dimensions too. You talked about the short porch and left, and then you also have Taos Hill with the flagpole and play in center field. Right. So that changed some of that play as well.
Yeah, I loved having Taos Hill. I thought it gave us a lot to talk about. It gave us some interesting highlights, and it was just a whole different dimension. So I was sad that they did away with Taos Hill. I still would like to see it, but I understand the players didn't like it, but I think the fans loved it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So jumping ahead to, 2004, 2005, you have the Astros contending for and winning division and league championships at that time. And then back to the Reds a little bit too. So how much easier does it make your job as a broadcaster when the team is in that position to win and clinch and possibly have that type of year?
It really does your job for you. You don't really even have to do your job in terms of working more to come up. If you're with a last place team, that's work. You've got to sit there and think, well, okay, if we get blown out, if we're down 9-1 in the fifth inning tonight, what am I going to talk about? And so maybe you do some research and come up with a story that you haven't told or something, just what's going on with another team in baseball that's interesting, that's because this game is not, and that sort of thing. But if you're in the hunt like that, and, Astros, I think they won 18 straight at home at the end of 2004. Those games just do themselves. They play out. There's no need to work very hard at that. You just let the game unfold. But that was a great time, and people ask sometimes, well, what's your most favorite call or anything like that, and I would say, well, we don't have a lot of the big moments on TV because the networks do the postseason games. And so I would go back to 2004, the last game of the regular season when the Astros had to win to make the playoffs, or 2005, same thing. So it was 2 years in a row. And then 99, the last game there in the Dome to get into the playoffs. All those 3 years, I think the final game of the regular season on TV was probably ranking up there for me among my favorites. And there were so many postseason moments. Of course, the guys on radio get them all, so they had a great time, and they're still having a great time with those.
So in 2007, you've got the call for Craig Biggio's 3,000th career hit at home, and so in typical Biggio fashion, he takes that hit and he tries to stretch it into a double. Yeah. So to watch his entire career, and to have a chance to call that, to call that moment and be behind the mic for that. What is that like when you do have a milestone achievement or a team achievement as a broadcaster, and then how do you let that moment play out a little bit and not come in over the top of it, intentionally or not?
Mm-hmm. I think that was one of my biggest blessings with the Astros, was doing the whole career of Biggio and Bagwell. You know, that's a rarity. 20 years for Craig, 15 years for Jeff. In these days of players moving on to other teams and broadcasters moving on to other teams, that doesn't happen a whole lot. I wish I'd done some things differently. I'm not going to beat myself up over it. On Craig's hit, I think I got caught up in the moment. I think I did too much of a radio style descriptive call about where he hit the ball and what was going on, because people can obviously see that on TV. You don't need to describe it, but I was just so pumped and so hyped for the moment, you know, this career achievement thing. And this friend of mine who did the Colorado Rockies, Wayne Hagan, had lunch with me when we were in Colorado a couple of weeks before that hit. And he said, well, have you thought about your call of the 3,000th hit coming up? I said, no, I don't believe you can script anything like that. I think you just have to let it unfold, because it's a scripted call just falls flat. So I don't want to do that. He said, well, I think you need to think about it, because this is one of the biggest moments in the history of your franchise. And you know, this call is going to be replayed a lot down through the years. So give it some thought. Well, now he's got me, you know, twisting myself into all kinds of mental gymnastics about, you know, he's got me worried now for the next 2 weeks. And I'm trying to come up with a line, not during the hit, but afterwards. Okay, we've got to do something to stamp this and make this distinctive for, you know, future posterity and all this sort of thing. So I hadn't been able to come up with anything. We got back from Milwaukee the night before, and I'm driving in the garage, and finally this line that I've been looking for kind of came to me, and I wound up tacking it on after the hit, after the crowd reaction and the people on the field with Craig and his family and everybody celebrating. The crowd noise kind of died down. At that point, I said something to the effect of, well, that's hit number 3,000 for a man who was born in a small town in New York, and that will send him to another small town in New York, Cooperstown, someday. Something like that. And so that's what came to me, but it couldn't be a part of the actual call of the hit. You know, it was kind of a buzz kill, the hit itself, because he was out at second base. You know, we all wanted him to have another double, which was his, you know, signature career hit, doubles by a right-handed hitter. Nobody's had that many. So when he was thrown out at second, everybody knew he was going to go to second base, but Willie Taveras threw him out, and so it was this high, and then it came down a little bit lower when he was thrown out, but then you had to bring it back up again because it was such a great career achievement. So that was the challenge of that call.
I can imagine. So how did you get it? How did you bring it? How did you bring that emotion back up at that time?
I think I said, and he's out at second base, but that's hit number 3,000, or I think I had said 3,000, but that's whatever else I said after that. So I just tried to just pull out of that low there very quickly and turn it into more of a positive. So that was all I could think. You know, I mean, things are happening so quickly, and you can't possibly rehearse this stuff. It's just the moment.
And you have to let that happen naturally and organically.
Yes, you have to let it happen naturally and organically, and I'm sure there could have been a better way to do it, but it's history now.
And it turned out so great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Can you talk about how enjoyable it was to work in baseball and just the amazing, I'll use the word confluence of people?
I think that's, looking back on it now, it was such a blessing to me. And, you know, I'm not trying to make this bigger than it is, certainly, but we just had a meeting with the President's Council of KSBJ, the Christian radio station, and we talked about what can we do? What can KSBJ do to deal with the issues in our community right now and in our world right now that can somehow be a help to our listeners and to society in general? How do we deal with this? And we talked about things like road rage and people's incivility to other people, how people treat each other not very well, how they refuse to work together, politicians and what have you. So we got off onto a lot of heavy topics that are definitely topics of the day. Well, I'm thinking back, and I was so lucky that I've been in baseball for all these years. And, you walk into a clubhouse now, and one of the things we talked about was, hey, Houston is at the forefront of where the rest of the country is going to be in 20 years. A melting pot. We have more and more people from other countries who are here. We have more and more Hispanics. We have more and more Asians. And you walk into a major league clubhouse, and that's what you see. And that's what you've always seen.
Sure.
So, since Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and of course we had a lot more blacks playing in the 70s when I started. And I wish there were more blacks playing now, but some things you can't control. So, and it's all, when you walk in that clubhouse, it doesn't really matter where you came from or what you've done. There's a game today, and not us, but the players, they've got to find a way to work together and win this game today. That's their sole mission. So what I take from being blessed to be around this is, hey, no matter what you do, this is today. This is all we're guaranteed. Let's do the best we can to work together and make this a better place today, if we can. Now, that's an oversimplification, but I just think that another thing we talked about in the meeting is people are in a hurry right now. They're in a big hurry. It's hard for them to analyze what they're doing while they're doing it and look ahead and see what might be the significance of what they're doing. And so, to me, baseball just simplifies all that. And then, okay, you lose a tough game. You gotta, if you're the players or us, okay, pack up, get on the bus if you're leaving town, go to the next city. It gives you that mental closure. All right, this was a really tough day, or maybe you had a tough broadcast or whatever. You've got a problem at home, somebody's sick at home. You've got to travel, you want to be there for them, you can't. That is not something that is under your control. You've got to get on this bus and get on that plane and move on. So you've got to bring some closure to this difficult day and focus on what's ahead. And that to me is just, baseball mimics life in so many ways. And in that sense of trying to refocus every day, I think it's helpful.
I can certainly see that, and and to your point, no matter what else is going on, that next game is coming, whether you're ready for it or not.
Yep.
And that's just how it is.
It's going to come, and if you're still dwelling on what happened yesterday, it's not going to go well for you usually. You need to refocus and shove that into the back recesses of your mind and just look ahead and do what you can do now. You can't do anything about what just happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's all any of us can do.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, I want to talk about the actual job that you did on a game day basis. So what was, can you tell us what a day at the ballpark was like? So you park in the garage and you walk in, and then can you take us from there with the first thing that you're going to do?
Sure. And first, let me say that it begins when you get up in the morning. Typical job of a broadcaster is you're watching highlight shows in the morning from the night before. You're reading the morning paper. You're getting online and checking different things. You've got emails from the producer of the telecast. Hey, this is some of the material we're going to be presenting on the air in this game. You go over that pretty quickly, get some of your scorebook filled out. So a lot of the prep is done before you ever get to that garage. Okay. A lot of it, hours goes into it before you ever walk into that garage. Then you go, usually the first thing you would do if you're a broadcaster is go from your car to the club, directly to the clubhouse, get the lineup. You've got to have that lineup before you can do anything, because you're going to be writing statistics down by every player in that lineup. You're going to be making notes. Certainly for starting pitchers, you've usually done that even before you get to the ballpark, because you know who the starting pitchers are going to be. You don't know who the other guys in the lineup are going to be. So and then you'll go upstairs, you'll get everything set out on the counter the way you like it, grab a cup of coffee, go back downstairs, go to the manager's briefing with the media, talk to some players, maybe talk to some other people in the clubhouse, anybody, coaches, anybody, other media people. Hey, did you hear about so-and-so? No, hadn't heard that. Well, so you need to check that out, that kind of thing. Go to the other clubhouse, get their lineup, try to get in on their manager's session with the media, because I've always believed you're preparing for a broadcast with two teams, not just your team. And frankly, this is not superiority or anything like that, but if I hear a broadcast and they're not talking about the other team at all, they're just into their own team. Well, if their own team's 20 games ahead in first place, and they're playing a last place team from the other league that's not familiar to their fans, okay, you get a little bit of a pass on that. But there are still two teams playing this game. There are still fans of that team listening to your broadcast. You owe it to them, to be interested in their team, to be factually correct about their team. And Larry Durker and I used to talk about this all the time when we broadcast together for 10 years. We're not trying to manipulate anything, but we are salesmen. We are salesmen for the Astros. We're not going to tell you something that's incorrect. We're not going to try to spin something. But what we agreed on was, hey, if we're playing the Cardinals and we're tied for first place and we beat them, and we've talked about Albert Pujols back in the day, he was with the Cardinals, and Scott Rowland and all these other guys, and how good they are. It gives that win for us more credibility to have beaten, a good team with good players and that sort of thing. So to ignore the other team or denigrate the other team really was never my intent. I just always wanted to give credit where credit was due, and so you have to prepare for the other team as well. And that usually was a lot of my preparation. I really prepared more for the other team than for our team. You're watching your own team every day.
Right.
You try to come up with new stuff on them, but that's hard to do. But that's why you're in the clubhouse. And hey, well, Jose's kids were in the clubhouse today, and they were doing this and that and the other thing. Just a little conversational jab. But the other team, I think, deserves some attention on the broadcast too.
And some equal treatment.
Yes.
As well. And so what are your sources for the? So you talked about the clubhouse, but what are some other sources there? Is it a media guide and then press notes?
My best source would be the broadcasters for the other team, because they know what I want as a broadcaster. They want the same things from me about our team, so we would trade information. And you get to be really good friends with the broadcasters for another team. You'd probably have one guy was your go-to guy, and you talk to him more than the other broadcasters. But yeah, and that, so we built up some great friendships, and that's the thing about this job. You're always talking baseball. You really are. It's just a constant, and you never get tired of it. So what a joy to have a profession like that,
Absolutely.
And believe me, when I was driving down 290, and I would look over on the side of the road, and I'd see a road crew out in 95-degree heat, I tried to tell myself, how lucky are you? You could be doing that job, and you're talking baseball.
I had that job a couple years ago, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, God bless you, because that's a difficult job.
So in talking to the other broadcasters and forming those friendships, that's its own fraternity in and of itself, isn't it?
It is, and Rick Riz, the Seattle radio play-by-play broadcaster, has been doing that job for, I don't know, he was with Detroit, he's been with some other teams, but He's, I think, beyond 40 years now in the big leagues. Still as sharp as he ever was. He was one of my best buddies. And I don't talk to Rick anymore. I don't want to bother him. But somebody put on social media his call of the Yordan Alvarez Game 1 homer, walk-off. And he did a great job. And you know, it's so disappointing. But there's a responsibility here that we just talked about to the game itself, to the other team, to describe what's happening. And this is a great player who just beat you. It's going to happen. Tough that it happens under that circumstance, but you could sense the disappointment in his voice at the end of the call. But he had excitement in there, and you know, I know some fans would disagree with this, but that's the way I would have called it too. It's an exciting play. You know, when Matt Cain pitched a perfect game against us, that we didn't want to have a perfect game pitched against us, but that is a rarity in baseball. And it got to the point where, you know, if you've done a lot of games as a broadcaster, you're kind of rooting for the guy. You don't think you're going to win. So, okay, we can write that off, but yeah, it'd be nice to see a perfect game. I've never done one of those, and it was special. It was special.
I can imagine, but with his call on the home run, back to that for a second, there's excitement on his side, but it's a different. There's this excitement on this side, and then there's the excitement and the disappointment on their side.
Exactly, and that I think is important for a broadcaster. You are broadcasting, in his case, for the Seattle Mariners. You're not supposed to be happy here, and the fans are not expecting it, and you need to give them that disappointment. You need to let that come through. And this is nothing you sit around and try to do, or you can orchestrate. It just happens, but because you're invested, you're emotionally invested in your team. So it's going to be obvious to people who want your team to win that you're not happy either, and that's fine. But I think, you know, and I will be a little critical of Harry Carey on that front. He would get down on the Cardinals when he was doing their games, or White Sox, or whoever, but he was a fan, and fans, I'm not using it in a derogatory way, but as a broadcaster, I don't think you should be that much of a fan that you have these highs and lows and you get distraught and upset and, you know, yelling at your team, and that, to me, that doesn't play well. I think, you know, Harry's in the Hall of Fame, so who am I to say, but you know, the players don't like it. I think you're feeding into the fans' frenzy a lot of times when you get down on players and bury them and act like there's no way that would have happened with a good player. You know, when you're burying one of your guys, that just doesn't wear well. And I don't think it's right. In my opinion, you know, you've got to cut players some slack. They're not trying to make errors. They're not trying to do this. Yeah, Brad Lidge gave up a home run to Pujols, and it cost us a playoff game. But if you bury the guy, I don't think that's fair either. I really don't.
No, and he had a tremendous season to that point.
He had.
And those things happen in playoffs.
They do happen. These are two great teams. Only one of them's going to win.
Right. But in those moments, my question now is it, you don't want to put yourself up and above and over the broadcast. It's your role and your job to just relay it and be behind the scenes a little bit there too.
That's right. That's right. I think it's your job to tell the story. I think it's your job to interpret, you know, maybe why something happened, and that usually falls on the analyst to say, well, he was playing him more up the middle, and that hadn't been done in the past, and then he couldn't get back to his right to make that pickup. So whatever, but yeah, I think that it's kind of a more dispassionate role much of the time. Hey, I'm a reporter here. And that's why I always prefer Jack Buck to Harry Carey. Right. I thought Jack, since they were on together, it was a good contrast, but Jack was a reporter. It wasn't about him. When Harry was on, he was more of a showman. Now, he could build drama in a game like nobody. I mean, he had you on the edge of your seat, but then if the Cardinals lost, you were sinking down in your seat. You know, with Jack Buck, it was just, well, okay, they lost. And yeah, he wasn't happy about it, but it wasn't going to ruin, the next 2 weeks of his life either.
Can you talk about how important or how it was different? Maybe you got a different perspective when your color analyst was a former player like a Jim DeShays or Larry Durker.
Yeah, I was always, for the most part, well, in Houston, in Cincinnati, we had broadcasters from other cities, and we'd be like Ray Lane would be there, and Ken Coleman. So they were both living in other cities. Ray lived in Detroit and Ken lived in Boston, and they were freelancing the job. So they didn't live in Cincinnati, and we both had great relationships. All of us did, and but we weren't former players. So my preference would be to work with a former player. And so when I got to Houston, it was Larry Durker, and then Jim DeShays, as you mentioned, and then Alan Ashby. So I always really relied on their knowledge of the game from having played it for all those years. I always felt that I needed to give them time to talk on the air. And I know we've had discussions in the past, all three of those guys and myself, about, hey, I'm not trying to lead you to a conclusion, but I want to give you time to explain. And if I said something that you thought should be colored in a different vein, go for it. Disagree with me. I think that's good television. Two people disagreeing. We don't have to agree on everything. And I think that draws the listener and the viewer in a little bit more. Oh, these guys are going at it a little bit each time that this happens. But it very seldom happened that way. It was more like they were teaching us the game. They were explaining, okay, I think what happened here was he was trying to throw that slider on the inside corner and didn't quite get it there, and that's why the batter got a hit. That sort of thing. And I think that they all really, really taught me the game. And so I'm like, in a way, I'm identifying with the viewer. All right, I'm learning as much from this guy as you are, because I don't know it all. I mean, if there's one thing you learn about baseball, you definitely don't know it all. You find that out all the time.
Very good. Very good. So let me ask you about your faith in God for a moment. In looking back on your career, is it very, like, all the way back to, before Vietnam, high school, all the way back? Is it very easy to see now how God was present in those moments and how He went ahead, He forged that, blazed that trail a little bit for you, and led you to how your career progressed?
It is, and at the time it wasn't always that way, of course. But Diane and I were baptized as Christians when we were in Cincinnati, so we were in the late 70s. So that was before I got fired in '82, which really helped us get through that. And that was kind of a career crisis kind of thing where, okay, they let me stay on at the station for 50% pay until I could find something, and they were good about it. And then I was lucky enough to get another job. But these are times that you rely on your faith, and then bingo, a year later we're looking for work again, and bingo, a year later we're looking for work again, and 2 years later it's like, this thing isn't going well, and what's going to happen here? And I was ready to get out of the business of broadcasting and do something stable, because we didn't want to have to move our daughter around the country anymore. We just wanted her to go to school in the same place. And so when we got here, she was in the second grade, and that allowed, no, I take it back, she was further advanced than that, but that allowed her to stay here throughout all of her high school, and then she went to Baylor. So it really solidified our family lives, and that was all God's doing. Believe me, I had no idea where we were going. And when I came to Houston, I think it was a 2-year contract. And then after that, it was a series of 1-year contracts. So, typically in the industry, I think in most cities, the contracts were longer than that. But I don't look at it as a negative, because, if you believe in God's word, well, how do I know what I'm going to be doing 2 weeks from now? Nothing is assured here. Nothing's guaranteed. You just have to have faith. And it worked out. But looking back on it now, definitely it was God's doing. And I try to recognize that, and we try to, now as 75-year-olds, it's not about us anymore. It's not about, getting to retirement and, saving X amount of dollars and all these things. It's more about the grandkids and people around us and what can we do here? What is our mission in life now?
Right. How can we help people? How can we still make a difference in those things?
Yeah, because you have a certain debt, I think, as a Christian, you do, and you realize that you still have God-given abilities, even though you're a little bit older and don't have maybe quite the energy you used to have, but you can still mentor some people. You can give somebody a phone call who's going through a tough time, things along those lines.
And then can you talk about it in that vein in making a difference? You've done so much charitable work here, and you've been a volunteer reader for Sight into Sound for the last 3 decades now. Can you talk about how about a human interest story that's really resonated with you? And in this case, certainly it's the Bob Aspromani and Billy Bradley story.
Yeah, Bob Aspromani was, of course, one of the stars of the early Colt 45s, starting in '62, and Billy Bradley, the young man in Arkansas, was 10 years old at the time, and he was struck by lightning coming off the baseball field, going to a metal drinking fountain. The bolt of lightning passed through a tree, and it fried the lenses on his eyes, so he was blind in both eyes and had to come to Houston for surgery. And the first doctor he saw in Arkansas said he wouldn't see again, but the doctor here, Dr. Louis Gerard, said, no, we can do this with about 3 surgeries. You'll be seeing again. So he came in, and Bob Aspromani was his favorite player, and he had, I think his parents called the ball club, Colt 45s, and explained the thing to him. So Bob came over to visit him, and I think he gave him a autograph ball and some other things, and Billy listened on the radio, and Bob hit a game-winning homer, and then this wound up happening 3 different times. He came for 3 different surgeries, and Bob hit game-winning homers, one of them a grand slam, and so this was divine intervention, as Bob Aspromani called it. So great story, and then Billy wound up, his vision was restored. He was able to see the 3rd home run that he had requested each time for Bob Aspromani. And each time Bob said, hey, I'm not that much of a home run hitter. And a couple of times he was in major slumps and still hit home runs. So obviously it was divine intervention. And so I think about that story. And I think about when I was in Cincinnati, there was a blind Reds fan named Wayne Ryan. And he would call me for tickets every now and then to games. And I got to know him. He'd call the other broadcasters, and they'd give him tickets. And one spring training, he was down in Tampa, and I was down there for a telecast, and I was talking to him, and he said, are you going to the game in St. Pete tomorrow against the Cardinals? I said, yeah, I'm going to drive over there. And he said, well, could I ride along with you? So I picked him up, and we went over there, and we sat in the stands together. I was not working that day. And he said, well, describe this play for me. Just describe what's going on for me. And because he was a big fan of radio. And I realized, this is what we do. So I always try to think of that. And of course on TV, that's not your job to describe as much. So if I'm blind, I'm listening to radio because I want to hear that description. I want to have somebody painting that canvas for me. But, when I was doing radio, I thought of that. And I thought of Wayne Ryan. And then I was reading in the paper, I think we'd been here 2 or 3 years, about this service, which is now called Sight into Sound. It used to be called Taping for the Blind, and they talked about how, well, we've got, hundreds of volunteers who come down and read, and they tape shows, and it's a radio station that blind people listen to. So I didn't have anything to really do in the wintertime, the off season, decided I would volunteer, and I started going down once a week, we'll say, in the off season, and it's been very rewarding. occasionally there'll be a letter up on the bulletin board from a client, as we call them. Hey, thanks to the volunteers for helping out my day, or something like that. So it just kind of reinforces in me the fact that sight is a gift. We don't think of it. Very seldom do we think, hey, this is a gift. But it is, that not everyone has. So, somebody will read the Houston Chronicle, somebody will read Sports Illustrated magazine, and throughout the day, the 24-hour service, there will be different books that are read, different publications that are read for people who do not have the gift of sight or they're dyslexic, and that's what that service does for the community, and I think it's a really good service.
That's a great contribution that you've made, and I know how much they appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I want to ask you one more question, and I'll land the proverbial plane here, and we'll get us out of here. Is there a charity or a cause that we can alert the listeners to, that they can follow and contribute to, that's something that's a personal thing for you that you're?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you. Sight into Sound is a good one. It's not a well-known charity in our area. It doesn't require millions and millions of dollars to operate. It's a very efficient charity. The volunteers do all the reading. So there are, I think, 2 or 3 full-time employees. There's the equipment. A lot of the digital recording equipment, of course, needs to be maintained. There's an old building that's, we don't even go to the building anymore. The volunteers record from their homes now. After the pandemic, we discovered that recording on our telephones with that voice memo on an iPhone, the audio quality is fantastic on that. So you can sit in your closet at home and do a 30-minute program and text it to them. And they'll put it on the air. It's amazing. But that's a great charity, Sight into Sound. They're having a golf tournament here in a couple weeks for a fundraiser, but they don't do many fundraisers. Diane and I are involved with the Sci-Fair Educational Foundation. We're doing Salute to Our Heroes next Saturday, a week from today, which is a dinner to raise money for scholarships. And we have a military speaker every year. We do the Missing Man Table. We acknowledge the veterans. It's a great military type function. We had Oliver North one year, so I've met a lot of real heroes at this dinner. I always look forward to emceeing that, and we've been involved with the auctions for years. So we have 12 high schools in Sci-Fair, and so that's a lot of scholarship money we have to raise every year. But that's another good foundation. But those are a couple.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you I know I'll speak for all of those organizations and boards and charities to say for them how much they appreciate all of your work over the years, all the money you've raised, and you and Diane being present for them. I know how much they appreciate that. And I personally appreciate you being a man of faith. And this has been just a great conversation with you today. I've really enjoyed spending time with you, and I appreciate you very much, sir.
Thanks, Greg. We've had a tremendous friendship over the years, and I hope you continue doing this podcast. I think you're serving a lot of people, and I wish everybody out there all the best.
Thank you very much again. All right, everyone. Thank you again for listening to the Heroes and Icons podcast with your host, Greg Randolph. And once more, thank you again to our guest, Bill Brown, for accommodating me today. Have a great night, everyone. God bless.